Ultrahuman Ring Air versus the Whoop 5.0 MG as in medical grade. Now in this video I'm going to share with you how I've been using those devices, the pros and cons, some of the features that are unique to either platform, and most importantly how I've been using those devices to improve my health span. Now I want to point out that I've been using the Whoop platform since 2019. I've had a lot of experience with Whoop over the years. I started with the Whoop 2.0, then 3.0, 4.0, took a little bit of a break when the Ultrahuman Ring Air came out. I think that was a year or two or so ago. So I've already been wearing this for quite some time. My wife uses it and some friends use it as well. Now in this video, I'm going to talk specifically about, what sensors they use, how they do things, their sleep tracking, recovery tracking, fitness tracking, their approach on health span, which is arguably the most important aspect for me. I want to live as long and as healthily as possible. So that's health span, not just living long, lifespan, but health span is very important to me, and both brands have added a lot of capabilities to those respective devices to make that happen, to give you the tools to improve all of the aspects I've already mentioned, including your health span. We're gonna talk a little bit about the differences between the regular Whoop 5.0 and the MG, that medical grade version of the device that has a couple of extra features that might or might not be worthwhile. And with that we're gonna jump right in. I should also mention I have a very detailed blog post on the very subject, comparing those two devices on michaelkummer.com, so check that out. It has a lot of the comparison tables and as far as the sensors and the biometrics are concerned. But generally speaking, both devices have the same core set of sensors. They have an optical heart rate meter that uses green and red LEDs and near infrared LEDs, I should say. So 3 colors really to measure your heart rate variability, so the difference in timing between heartbeat, which is a good indication of how your nervous system is doing, and your blood oxygen saturation. They also have a temperature sensor that can measure your skin temperature. Also, that is an indication of how your body is doing, if you're maybe coming up with an infection, in what stage of your cycle you are, if you're a menstruating female, and under how much stress you are. So those kind of sensors can help you, or can help the platform to surface some of those biometrics that are more calculated than directly measured. And then both also have a gyroscope and an accelerometer, meaning they can tell if you're moving, how much you're moving, in what direction you're moving, etc. Any type of vibrations, all of those things those devices can measure as well. Again, here I'm going to probably show on the side, then I'm going to ask my editor kindly to show that comparison table as far as the sensors are concerned. As you can tell, they are fairly comparable. The one thing that's, I guess, separate, or that the Whoop MG has extra is, I'm not sure if you can see it here, but there is this guy here, and that is part of the ECG. So you can take an on-demand ECG by closing the loop, basically. So the device sends an electrical impulse into your arm, it goes through your body and comes out here with those 2 fingers enclosing the sensor area here, and that can record an ECG. So it can tell you about your heart health. Now this is an on-demand kind of thing, so it doesn't do it continuously. You're not gonna run around with your fingers on the sensor, but that's extra or addition to the MG, which the regular Whoop 5.0 does not have. And then the second thing that you can't really see per se here, but this device has the capability to estimate your blood pressure based on several readings you can take with a blood pressure cuff, and then it uses biometrics to kind of estimate your blood pressure once a day. Not entirely sure how accurate it is, but that's there, that the regular Whoop 5.0 does not have, and the Ultrahuman Ring Air does not have that capability either. I'm okay with that because I've taken the ECG once just for giggles. I'm not going to do this on a regular basis because I also know that my heart is healthy, so it's probably not something that I need. If you have heart condition, this might be a valuable feature to maybe once a day, twice a day, whatever, take your ECG and see if there's anything going on that you might, or you should be aware of, or maybe your doctor, so that's an important aspect. Beyond that, there are a couple of things that both devices can measure directly, like the heartbeat, your heart rate, your heart rate variability, your skin temperature, your blood oxygen saturation. So those are all directly measured metrics, and the accuracy of those measurements are fairly accurate. So based on the studies and the tests that I've seen, those measurements are fairly spot on if you're at rest, meaning if you're not moving. And that's particularly important, I guess, because a lot of those metrics matter during sleep. What is your resting heart rate? What is your heart rate variability while you're at sleep? And so they are fairly accurate. Now, when there is movement involved, like, you're jumping around, you're running, you're maybe doing, CrossFit type of workouts, and there is movement of the sensor, the accuracy of those measurements go down, which is why heart rate during exercise is not as accurate as heart rate recorded at rest, but at least at rest, those sensors are absolutely accurate. Now, there is a second set of metrics, biometrics, that both devices record, and those are derived or calculated, meaning that both devices monitor your stress levels, and that is done using a combination of skin temperature and heart rate variability to kind of calculate or estimate under how much stress you're under. Because if you're under stress, chances are your heart rate is higher, relatively speaking, your HRV is lower, relatively speaking, and your skin temperature likely changes. And so that's only one of the examples, and sleep stage tracking is also one of those metrics that is calculated or derived. And there is a certain amount of inaccuracy. Now, how accurate those devices are with those specific or derived measurements is unknown to a degree. Now, both have validation studies and all of that, but it depends on so many factors, and one of them is the contact of the sensor with your skin, how much movement there is involved, and a lot of other things that I don't truly know how accurate those individual numbers are. But what I do believe is that the trends those devices report are still useful, because if they are inaccurate, but the same inaccuracy, all the time, based on your physiology, based on your movement patterns, etc., you can still see trends, and that's ultimately important for me. But that's just, so you know that there is a difference between directly measured metrics that are highly accurate, at rest at least, and derived and calculated ones that are likely less accurate, but still useful in the grander scheme of things, especially if we look at trends. Now, what do those devices really do at the end of the day? Well, a couple of things that I use. There are by now so many capabilities, and I cannot go into all of those. That would make the video an hour long. But the most important ones for me, or the arguably the most important one, is recovery tracking. So when I wake up in the morning, I can look at the Whoop app, I can look at the Ultrahuman app, and I see a recovery score, which is an indication, or which relies on sleep metrics, meaning how much sleep did I get, what was my resting heart rate compared to my baseline, what was my heart rate variability, and my stress levels during sleep. And based on that, the platform tells me how ready I am, or how capable my body was to respond to the stressors of the previous day. In other words, just to give you one example, and you can kind of understand what that means. Imagine that today I'm gonna work out, I kill myself at the gym, I'm completely wiped out, I have a lot of stress at work. So all of those things require my body to spend a lot of resources in repairing and restoring my readiness, to deal with all of what happened, to repair muscle tissue, to help my brain consolidate memories, and to, do all of the things that typically happen at night when you sleep, during deep sleep, during REM sleep. And if my body is struggling with dealing with all of that because I intentionally or unintentionally overreached, I put myself under more stress that I could handle without going into repair mode, then my body's gonna respond to this with likely a higher heart rate, because my heart has to pump more blood, more nutrients, more oxygen to repair and recover. My heart rate variability is likely going down because of the additional stress of my nervous system response to those stressors. My temperature might be elevated, my stress levels, my overall stress levels might be still elevated as my body tries to, or my nervous system more specifically, kind of to calm down. And all of those metrics then are recorded and captured by those devices, and in the morning I get a score that basically is a reflection of how was my body handling those stressors overnight. If I have a very high score, that means my body handled those stressors well. If I have a lower score, that means my body was struggling. Now, that's not always necessarily a bad thing, because one of the principles of improving, of getting stronger and more resilient, is to endure, to put yourself under stress, to cause potentially some damage, which then triggers the body to repair and get stronger in response. I get stronger. Working out is a catabolic event. It breaks down muscle tissue, but in response, my body builds more muscle tissue, so it is capable of handling that same stressor in the future. And so that's the whole idea. You don't always have to have a perfect recovery score, but you need to functionally overreach at times to improve and get better. And so the recovery score reflects it and can help me then to say, okay, I've had a poor recovery for 2 weeks. Maybe it's time to lay off a little bit, to try to reduce my stress, to maybe take it easier in the gym, or whatever the case might be. So that's, for me, is a very good indication of what I'm doing from a lifestyle perspective, and whether or not how I think I feel or how I feel reflects what my body is telling me or the biometrics are telling me. So I always look at it and say, okay, yes, I know my recovery score is low because yesterday I did something intentionally, so that's all good. But if my recovery score suddenly drops for no good reason, that's usually an indication where my body is fighting an infection or something. It has been absolutely reliable in the past, and that's what I use to kind of gauge, again, how my body is doing overnight. So that's one thing. For me, the most important aspect. The second one is sleep tracking, which is a favorite of many biohackers and fitness enthusiasts to see how they are sleeping. Now, again, sleep stage tracking is a calculated score. It is an estimate based on what the algorithm thinks, based on your heart rate and movement and other factors. It's not 100% reliable. In fact, both devices sometimes show me entirely different numbers. Very often they are usually somewhat in the ballpark, but I don't focus too much on individual numbers because I don't really know if they're accurate, but on trends. If I see that my overall sleep quality is trending up, I know that I'm doing something right. If it's trending down, I need to think about, okay, what is it that I'm doing? Do I eat too late or too much too late? Maybe that glass of wine on Saturday night did not help my sleep. Or maybe training late and very intensively didn't help my sleep. And so I kind of look at that from a trend perspective to see how it reflects what I know about what I did and what I maybe didn't know, and to kind of, take corrective measure if necessary. The third aspect, the least important one for me, is fitness tracking. Now, Whoop uses a strain score, what they call it. So they measure specifically cardiovascular strain. And that's important to understand because you can be under a lot of physical strain, like if you're weightlifting, without necessarily increasing your heart rate. And Whoop does a very poor job at tracking that because it uses heart rate as the primary indicator of your cardiovascular strain. And if you do something that doesn't increase your heart rate dramatically, then you have a very low strain score, even though you might be walking out with help from the gym because you're so sore that you can't even walk anymore. Now, Whoop has some mitigative aspects. They have a separate strength coach, etc., that can kind of, you can feed with information and it can calculate a better score. But overall, Whoop is all about cardiovascular strain. And the problem is it also relies a lot on the accelerometer. And to give you one example, or the consequence of that is I once built a chicken coop and I was hammering a lot and drilling, and I had my highest ever recorded strain score building a chicken coop. And while it was, I would argue, a physically somewhat demanding job, it wasn't the most demanding thing I've ever done in my life. Whoop has limitations because it very much focuses on cardiovascular strain. Ultrahuman takes a completely, or more or less completely approach. It's more about how active you are, how many active minutes you have throughout the day. And I think for the average user, for the average consumer, that's a more appropriate metric to measure because being active, moving throughout the day is incredibly important. I would even argue that I'd rather, walk, stand up and move around throughout the day instead of working out very hard in the morning for an hour and then sitting for the rest of the day. I think from a health span perspective, moving throughout the day is likely more beneficial. And so that's what Ultrahuman tracks. So kind of two different things, two different approaches to activity tracking. I think the Ultrahuman approach is more valuable at the end of the day. From a, again, we talked about accuracy a little bit already. I think both devices are accurate enough to be helpful, but they have limitations. And you should know about those limitations, and specifically the difference between directly measured metrics at rest and everything else, as we talked about already. So we're not going to go too much more into accuracy and which device is more accurate because it depends at the end of the day, right? One thing that's important, arguably, for many users is battery life, right? And how to charge the device. Now, Whoop and Ultrahuman take an entirely different approach here again because, there are different form factors. With Whoop, the old Whoop lasted, and by that I mean the 4.0 and earlier generations, for about 5 days. And then you had to recharge the device. Now, the good news is you could recharge it with a battery pack. Let me get the battery pack to show you. So this is the Whoop battery pack, and you can just slide it on and charge Whoop on the go. This is, you can take it in the shower. It's waterproof. So it's very convenient to recharge Whoop without having to take it off. And what I really love about the Whoop 5.0 is the battery life. It has 14 days of battery life, and that's incredible. I mean, it's only 2.5 times more than before. So one might argue, well, charging it every 5 days or every 14 days, it is a huge difference for me, at least, because so much so that I don't even remember when was the last time I charged. I'm like, every so often, I'm like, maybe I should charge Whoop again. It's been forever, it feels like. And so I kind of keep forgetting about the need to recharge Whoop because it always has battery. And then at some point, I slap on the charger and it charges, and great. I really love that about the new Whoop, and probably the main reason I'm still wearing it because of the battery life. Absolutely love that. Now, with the Ultrahuman Ring, the initial promise was 4 to 6 days, and that's how long the ring lasted. And instead of you have to take it off, obviously, and put it on this little charger here. It connects via USB-C, and you put it on, and 1.5 hours later or whatever, the ring is fully charged. And it was like every 4 to 6 days. Not as convenient as Whoop, but doable. But lately, I have to admit that there is something wrong with the battery. Ever since they started updating firmware and adding new capabilities, the battery life of the Ultrahuman Ring Air has been absolutely terrible. Like maybe at 1 to 2 days tops, I feel like I get a low battery notification on like all the time. And that's become really frustrating because I don't care about, if I have to stress out about charging devices because they run out of battery every other day, I don't care for them, and so I have a feeling it's a firmware issue, not a hardware issue, because the battery life was there before and now it isn't anymore since they made updates. They also release constantly new updates, so I'm hoping that they'll fix it. Time will tell, but that's the one big negative about the Ring. Now, from a using it perspective, for different types of workouts and stuff, maybe that's also important to know because there are significant differences. I really like how the Ring looks. I actually use it instead of my wedding band. I can wear it everywhere. I barely take it off, except when I go CrossFit and I do barbell movements like pull-ups, cleans, anything with a dumbbell, barbell, kettlebell, whatever. I have to take it off because it scratches and it's super uncomfortable. It pinches my skin and I have to take it off, and that means I cannot track that workout, which again is not super important to me, but I kind of, if I track something, I want to kind of have a complete track record, and so it's a little bit of a bummer that I have to take it off and then rely on another device to feed into my phone. With Whoop, on the other hand, it doesn't bother me for any of those movements. The only thing, if I do like kettlebells where the bell hangs this way, it might bump into it, but so far it has not been a problem. The only time when I would have to take it off is when I wear grips, like gymnastic grips for pull-ups and stuff, because the strap goes right around here and then I either have to move it back and it's too tight, or I have to take it off. I don't wear grips very often anymore, so it's really a non-issue for me. But if you do gymnastics movement like toes to bar, pull-ups, what have you, especially kipping or butterflies where the grips can really make a difference between you falling off and not, this might be an inconvenience, but you can wear it on your biceps. There are different wearing options, I suppose, but that's from a wearing perspective, I really like the Ring, except again for those barbell type of movements. We talked about battery life. What else is there to say? Both apps are great as far as I'm concerned. They provide a lot of actionable information about what's going on in your body and what you can do to improve it. Both platforms also added intensive lab testing or fairly detailed lab testing, so you can go to Quest and get your lab drawn for a very reasonable fee. And then the platforms correlate your blood markers again with everything that's going on, that's tracked from a biometrics perspective, to give you even more insights on how you can improve your health span and overall health. So I really like this. There's at least one more thing that I want to point out, and that was the reason why I stopped wearing Whoop 4.0 last year or so, and that is this device does not support airplane mode. So when I sleep, very often I have my arm, or I rest my head on my wrists, and I don't want to have a Bluetooth radio right next to my marble because the brain is incredibly sensitive to man-made EMFs. I'm aware that the earth emits EMFs, all of that is all good. I'm not saying all EMFs are evil, but the amount of man-made EMFs that we are exposed to in our modern lives is unprecedented, and I want to err on the side of caution, saying that maybe they are not an issue, but if they are, and we'll only find out in 30 years, I'd rather take corrective action now. And so I want to reduce my EMF exposure, especially to my brain, while I sleep. And so Whoop doesn't have airplane mode. I hate it. Guys, what's wrong with you? Can be so simple. When you detect that someone is sleeping, turn on airplane mode. When you detect someone is up, disable it. You can already detect when I fall asleep and when I wake up. Just add it. Even if some people don't care about it, maybe most people don't care about it, there are those, especially in the biohacking and longevity space, that do care about fucking EMFs. So please, Whoop, add this. Anyway, the Ultrahuman Ring Air has airplane mode. It can be done apparently. And so the only thing is it doesn't do it automatically, so you have to go into the app and enable airplane mode, but that's not a big deal. And to disable it, put it back on the charger, which right now, since I have to charge the Ring so often, happens automatically. But that's another thing. Pricing wise, let's talk about pricing, because there's a significant difference between those two. And the big thing is, with Ultrahuman Ring Air, you pay once and that is it. There is no membership, there is no ongoing kind of what have you. You pay $349 one time. I have discount codes and all of that. I'm gonna link it down in the description so you can check that out. $350 or $349 one time, and that is it. And Ultrahuman does a really good job of adding new features all the time, so you get a lot of value from your Ring, always new features without necessarily having to pay more. So that's really I like that. Whoop, on the other hand, has always been based on a membership model, so you pay not really monthly, but you pay an annual kind of fee, and that fee is different depending on what device you get. The Whoop 5.0, the standard, well, they have three plans really. They have the three tiers. We're gonna list it in here on the side so you can see exactly how they are called. But one starts at $199 per year, the other one $239, and the most expensive one, which is for the Whoop MG with the ECG and the AFib detection, etc., that is $359 per year. So if you have Whoop for several years, you pay. If you have it for 3 years, then that device is 3 times as expensive as the Ring. That is a lot, unless you don't have the budget and you don't care about that. But there is a significant significant difference, potentially, depending on what device or what option of Whoop you go with. With the top tier, again, you pay per year as much as you pay one time for the Ultrahuman Ring Air. That is a difference. Now, closing thoughts, I think both devices, from a sleep tracking, recovery tracking, fitness tracking, health span improvement kind of perspective, you can get great value out of all of those devices. You know, it really depends on ultimately what are your personal preferences, what is your budget, what do you work out. If you're a runner, maybe cardiovascular strain, perfect, you know, from the Whoop. If you're more like a weightlifter, and especially if that means, you know, back squatting and stuff, and things that don't necessarily involve, you know, rotation on the bar. Even I can deadlift with a ring, that's not a problem, but doing like cleans where the bar is rotating potentially, or doing pull-ups, not so ideal. So it really depends on, you know, your type of workout, etc. But from a recovery and sleep perspective, both devices are great. They both have now a lot of capabilities outside of the biometrics tracking, like with the blood panels, with the, you know, with the biological age, the health span, your Whoop age, your Ultrahuman age, your blood age, you know, all of those things that can help you figure out how old are you biologically, and based on your lifestyle choices, how does that impact your biological age over time? You know, as you get older chronologically, do you age at the same pace, or do you age slower, or maybe faster because you're always sleep deprived, or, you know, whatever the case might be. Whoop, and that's maybe one thing I didn't mention before, it also has a capability called the Whoop Journal, where you can every day answer a couple of questions. You can pick the things that you want to track in that journal, and for example, you know, alcohol consumption, magnesium consumption, sauna bathing, cold plunging, you know, all of those things, and then Whoop can correlate those things over time with changes in recovery and sleep quality. And so that's also useful. But anyway, so both devices are good. It really depends on what is your preference. What is my preference? I don't know. They both have pros and cons. I like the battery life of the Whoop. I like the Whoop Journal. I really like the form factor of the ring and the airplane mode. So I don't know. I wish there was one device that had both combined all of those features, but it is what it is. So let me know. You know, what do you think is better? Have you tried either of those? Which one do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. Send this video to someone who is on the fence between Ultrahuman Ring Air and the Whoop 5.0. And with that, we're gonna wrap it up. See you next time.